It was now July 1986 when 24-year-old Peter Jackson had been introduced into a small group of professional filmmakers working on a TV series called Wurzel Gummidge in his hometown of Wellington, New Zealand. When Peter mentioned to the group that had been making a movie in the weekends over the past 3 years and had shot 75 minutes of footage, curious, the professionals asked if they could take a look at it. Later fronting up for a viewing, Peter never forgot how nerve-wracking it was, especially with one of the viewers being the girl that had earlier caught his eye, Fran Walsh. This was the first time that anyone had seen anything from his first movie, Bad Taste. Not even his parents had seen it. Impressed by what they saw, they could see young Peter had talent in his filmmaking. Hearing about his knockbacks for funding, they encouraged him to go back to the Film Commission and try again, telling him, "You've got to show him the footage." Encouraged by the rousing support, Jackson fronted up to Film Commission boss Jim Booth one more time. This time, after viewing improved footage, Booth liked what he saw, getting a positive nod from film professionals and copying an earful from his assistant, Cindy Treadwell.
"When are you going to help the boy?"
Booth finally relented and gave the kid a shot. With Booth's change of heart, Pete decided he wasn't such a bad chap after all, and in fact marked the beginning of a wonderful friendship. With the funding trickling in, the first thing Pete did was quit his job and begin working full-time on finishing the movie. His number one dream had just come true. He was now a professional filmmaker. Submitting some film to the lab for processing, the form required a film company's name. Not having one, Pete settled on one that sounded unpretentious, even stupid, stealing the name of a workmate's pet rabbit, Wingnut. Sadly, Wingnut the rabbit met an unhappy ending with a ferret a few days later, but his name is now memorialised as one of the most successful film companies on the planet. With the help of friends and new supporters, Pete pushed on to the finished tape, finally after 4 years completing Bad Taste in November 1987, having spent $17,000 of his own money, topped up with Film Commission's grants of $15,000 and a whopping $200,000 for post-production work. The movie was ready, but would not be shown for several months at the prestigious Cannes Film Festival. Killing time before heading away, Pete was invited into 2 other projects, Braindead and Meet the Feebles, where he was kept busy making puppets, filming and honing screenwriting skills alongside new screenwriter friends Fran Walsh and Stephen Sinclair. Time flew by, and before he knew it, Pete was on his way to Cannes with TV producer Tony Hiles, Jim Booth and other Film Commission reps. Following a full-on promotional build-up, the film's premiere day arrived. The commission would learn the fate of its big gamble on an amateur movie made by a local photo engraver and a bunch of mates in the weekends. As the credits rolled, the movie was greeted with, who would have thought, a standing ovation, and won the festival's coveted prize for gore. Prior to screening, the Film Commission feared the movie would not be saleable, but in fact sold to 10 countries in the first 6 days, and another 20 in the weeks that followed, becoming a hit cult movie, netting a healthy profit. Jackson's career was now on the rise. An 8-day trip expanded into 2 months away as the budding filmmaker was suddenly in demand. On Jackson's triumphant return home, Film Commission boss Jim Booth, who had taken Pete the whole 9 rounds to get his funding in the first place, quit his job and teamed up with him to become his producer and business partner as Jackson squared up his next 2 movie opportunities, Meet the Feebles and Braindead. These 2 movies would be valuable learning experiences for Pete as he was about to ride the roller coaster of filmmaking politics. Braindead ushered 2 new key people into Pete's life, expert puppet makers Richard Taylor and his partner Tanya. The Taylors would go on to become the creative backbone of Weta Workshop in the years to follow, overseeing the staggering miniatures, prosthetics and weaponry later used on Lord of the Rings. Looking for a break away from splatter and gore, Pete and now personal partner Fran Walsh were intrigued by a true New Zealand crime story set way back in the 1950s, involving 2 teenage girls who brutally killed the mother of one of them. Working on a script, Jackson and Walsh did extensive research into police and court files, even interviewing people who had known the girls, enabling them to deliver a fresh perspective on the tragedy. Featuring the debut of Kate Winslet's movie career, Heavenly Creatures was released in 1994. The movie allowed Jackson to experiment with new digital special effects from his supporting company Weta Digital, now known as Weta FX. Prior to the movie's premiere, tragedy struck, with the sudden loss to cancer of Pete's producer and good friend Jim Booth, just as things were about to take off for them both. The movie receiving critical acclaim, winning several awards and an Oscar nomination, this was a bittersweet time for Jackson as he came to grips with Booth's departure. Picking himself up and back to work, Pete helped put together a hoax movie titled Forgotten Silver, directed by friend Costa Boats, before tackling a supernatural horror comedy called The Frighteners. Directed by Jackson and co-written with Fran Walsh, The Frighteners starred Michael J. Fox. Not doing particularly well in the box office, Frighteners was a slight stumble for Jackson, not helped by Universal's below-par marketing effort and a poor choice of release date. The film suffered from delays and budget blowouts due to the number of special effects, but on the positive was a good workout for the fledgling Weta special effects team. After Frighteners was a turbulent time for Jackson and his company, when in 1995 Universal Pictures greenlighted the remake of his childhood dream movie King Kong, and then stalled the project 2 years into development, leaving Wingnut and Weta scrambling to keep their companies afloat. Always with the eye on the ball, Jackson had earlier bounced around the idea with Fran of making a Lord of the Rings movie. Oddly, apart from a 70s animated attempt, no one had touched it. Hustling around, Pete struck a backup deal beforehand with Harvey Weinstein of Miramax in the event the Kong project fell over. And that's exactly what happened. With Universal shelving Kong in '97, Pete activated the backup plan and turned his sights on tackling the Lord of the Rings epic, with Miramax investing $15 million into pre-development. But only a year into the project, disaster struck yet again, this time with Miramax losing their nerve and deciding that Pete's vision for the project was too ambitious and expensive for them to handle. They tried pressuring Pete and Fran into condensing the entire trilogy into a single 2-hour budget movie. Not on their watch. After a standoff between Miramax and Jackson, Pete's agent Ken Cammons pushed hard, persuading the formidable Weinstein to throw Jackson a lifeline, giving him just 28 days to find a new studio to take over the project, otherwise the deal was off. A typical movie turnaround, as it's known, would normally take a year. 4 weeks to find a studio with a $15 million entry fee and a bunch of terms was a brutal request by Weinstein. Nevertheless, with hundreds of the staff's jobs on the line and one shot at saving the movie, Pete and Fran would fight to the end. With the clock ticking, they rounded up their team and made a plan. In just a week, putting together a 35-minute promotional video trailer that could still pack a punch today, showcasing $15 million worth of amazing props, models, effects and artwork, with commentary of the vision and Pete spicing it up out of his own pocket with a $50,000 display board and model show to wow the buyers. Armed with their plan and 3 weeks still on the clock, they headed for Hollywood. Prior to their arrival, copies of the video had been sent to numerous studios, most of whom declined. By the time they reached Hollywood, there were only 2 studios left in the running, Polygram and New Line. Polygram were the first up, and they liked what they saw. They ummed and they ahed, but when they said no, Pete's heart sank. With New Line their last hope, Jackson tried to remain calm, masking his desperation by strategically delaying their meeting and allowing himself time to sniff out any other possible plan Bs. Finally, meeting day arrived. Pete had one key advantage though, he had an ally on the inside. New Line executive Mark Ordesky, an old friend who liked his movies, and as an added bonus was a Tolkien fan. If anyone could get them over the line, he could. When Ordesky met Jackson and team on arrival, he warned them, if New Line's boss Bob Shea walks out after 5 minutes, it's all over. The thought hardly nerve-settling. After introductions, the tape was switched on. As the 35-minute mark ticked by, Pete was relieved to see Shea still sitting there. When the video was over, Shea turned to Pete and Fran and said, "Why do you want to make 2 movies?" After the performance with Miramax, Pete thought, oh heck, here we go again. Then Shea added, there were 3 books, weren't there? Shouldn't there be 3 movies? Pete and Fran looked at each other and couldn't believe what they were hearing. After agreeing, yes, 3 movies would be better, the rest is history, as Pete became the first filmmaker in cinema history to make 3 movies simultaneously, with sequels to a first movie that didn't even exist yet. The 274 filming days took 15 months to complete, all made in New Zealand with a $280 million budget. Released between 01 and 03, the trilogy was a box office hit, pulling in $3 billion, one of the highest grossing film series of all time, and scoring a clean sweep at the Oscars in 2004, with 11 Oscars, Jackson winning Best Director, and his wife Fran bagging 3 Oscars of her own. The success of the Rings trilogy was an iconic event for Jackson and the New Zealand film industry, with his team proving to Hollywood and the world that New Zealand could not only make movies, but big movies, now back with world-class film studios and post-production facilities in the Wellington suburb of Miramar. Jackson often had the uncanny ability of finding the right people at the right time, calling in screenwriter Philippa Boyens early in the Rings trilogy for her expertise on Tolkien books. Alongside Jackson and Walsh, the Oscar-winning trio became a winning combination in many films that followed. After the false start with his childhood favourite King Kong 9 years earlier, Pete got another bite at the cherry when Universal, embarrassed by their earlier lack of faith in the chosen one, patched things up, allowing Pete to achieve a personal dream and another win at the box office. Following Kong's release in December 05, Jackson said he just wanted to make a new version of the story, one that he would enjoy if he went to the movies to see it. In hindsight, admitting his delayed version of Kong was better than what he would have ended up with back in 95. Following Kong came other movies, Crossing the Line, The Lovely Bones, and then Jackson co-producing Tintin alongside Spielberg and Kathleen Kennedy. A possible Tintin sequel with Jackson in the director's seat is still on hold today. Then came the Hobbit trilogy, prequels to The Lord of the Rings, and released between 2012 and 14. Some 10 years earlier, Pete had said in a speech to his crew after the final day of shooting on The Rings, "I just want to do it again." He may have been ruining those words, as The Hobbit was to be plagued by chaos. Initially supposed to be a 2-movie series under the direction of Guillermo del Toro, who would bring a fresh look to the Tolkien classic, with Jackson in the backseat as producer. But it wasn't to be, with Del Toro departing the project 18 months into pre-production due to delays involving backers MGM, New Line and Warner Brothers. After Del Toro's exit, a new director coming in would meet a new vision, and it was Mr. Reliable Jackson who unwittingly found himself strapping back into the hot seat after getting a green light from backers. Filming was about to begin only a few months after Del Toro left. Jackson's new vision included extending The Hobbit to 3 movies and redoing everything. The pressure was on, with no time to prep, let alone plan a vision. Jackson admitted having to make stuff up as he went along. Special effects head Richard Taylor describing the intensity each morning as like laying tracks in front of a moving train. Pete, who was once described as the Swiss Army knife of adaptable directors, admitted if not for his 25 years experience, it would have been impossible. There was no time to think. Compounding matters, an actors' industrial dispute threatened to force the movie out of New Zealand, and Jackson was forced to take 6 weeks off after falling sick. To restore order to the mayhem, a timeout was called, pushing the final movie, Battle of the Five Armies, back 5 months. But when the mist cleared, Jackson and his team stepped up again to overcome the odds and smash out yet another box office hit, The Hobbit pulling in just short of $3 billion. And in the wake of The Hobbit, Jackson dived back into his love of war history, putting together a First World War doco, They Shall Not Grow Old. Then riding backseat as producer on Mortal Engines, a sci-fi fantasy about a post-apocalyptic world where cities are screaming around on wheels, gobbling stuff up, directed by Christian Rivers. Having a love of Beatles music from way back, he directed and produced a Beatles made-for-TV doco series Get Back, released in 2021. Away from the pressures of movie sets, Pete's escape and other passion in life is World War I aircraft, memorabilia and model kit sets, having the biggest collection of World War I planes in the world, his own squadron of 70, yes, 70, and they fly. Accurate replicas restored and built from scratch, from original blueprints and photographs. Many of the planes, along with lifelike displays, courtesy of Weta Workshop, are housed at the Allmarker Aviation Heritage Centre in Blenheim, top of the South Island, New Zealand, and the Hood Aerodrome in Masterton, 2 hours drive north of Wellington. In addition to warplanes, his website Wingnut Wings came about from his love of model making as a lad. Back then, frustrated over never being able to find models of First World War planes, he now has high quality ones made by his craftspeople and makes them available. Taking his hobby seriously, he employs dozens of local trade and craft specialists that he's met over the years while filmmaking, who bring the history back to life. Jackson had seen potential in video gaming back in 2005 and began developing technology in this area, leading to an historic deal in 2021, selling off a large chunk of Weta Digital FX to video games giant Unity for US $1.6 billion. In spite of the deal falling apart only 2 years later, Weta returned to Jackson's control and continues to expand. Looking back on his life, Jackson's arguably one of the most complete filmmakers on the planet, self-taught in every aspect of making a movie, with endless patience and a Kiwi figure-it-out attitude. Outside of the Hollywood system down under, he's been able to flourish. He describes filmmaking as fun. His boyish enthusiasm and Man of Steel leadership has drawn actors, craftspeople and technicians to him like a magnet. A humble avoider of the limelight, he once said, "At the end of a movie, one credit you'll not see is a Peter Jackson film. Movies are collaborations." Success for him's been no walk in the park, having to climb mountains to prove himself, first with the New Zealand Film Commission with Bad Taste, and then Hollywood. Having reached the pinnacle of his career with an Oscar back in 2004, Jackson said he had no desire to spend the second half of his life competing with Peter Jackson. From Peter Jackson's book, A Filmmaker's Journey by Brian Sibley. Pete treasures the past, from his charmed childhood to the workshop he constructed with his dad under their family home. The very place he made most of his models, props and effects for his first movie, Bad Taste. When he left home, his childhood was locked away in that basement. Whatever happens, we hope Peter Jackson never loses his childlike imagination, as we wait and wonder what he'll surprise us with next.